Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Agay. This is your host, Warisa Zainab. What we're going to discuss today is a very important issue, and it still exists in this day and age. Gender inequality, gender discrimination in many Asian countries is disrupting the lives of thousands and thousands of people. It not only impacts the society in a negative manner, but it also destroys our psychological well being. To address this issue and to talk about various aspects that exist in today's society, we have Noreen Fatima joining us from Pakistan, who is an educationist, an activist, and has done a lot of work on girls' and women's rights and issues affecting people living in Pakistan. Noreen Fatima, Salamu alaikum, and welcome to Agahi.
Walaikum assalam. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for taking the time out.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, first of all, Noreen, tell me about the work that you do in terms of activism and education. And you've been doing this for a very long time now. What encouraged you? What provoked you to do that?
So basically, this is something I actually studied when I was at university. And I think the more I got to know about the dynamics of gender injustice, the more, one feels that, one needs to really work on these issues because we see discrimination against women just so endemic across the world, really. Not just in Asian societies, but, even today, many European and first world countries are actually struggling with, for instance, the gender pay gap, for instance, against harassment of women, violence against women in different forms. So, it was something that really struck a deep chord within me. And I thought this is something that, is worth to work upon. And I was actually working for a bit in England as well in Haringey Council there, working on the domestic violence strategy. And then, of course, when I was in Pakistan, I was also working to campaign to raise awareness about the prevalence of violence as well as the solutions that can be addressed, to sort of address the kinds of different forms of violence that exist. So, yeah, I think that was it.
You also studied political science, I assume, and public administration.
Yeah, that's right. I did study public administration in my master's, and on that, I was actually looking at ways that the government can actually support the rights of women in terms of both the law, the legislation, and the implementation of the legislation. And so that is also that knowledge and that education sort of helps me in my campaigns. So it also plays a role in that.
So, what the current situation is right now, especially, say, for example, in Pakistan, and how the victims are often blamed for things and injustices that takes place, whether it's molestation or inequality in everyday life, whether accessing health services or education, and like you mentioned, gender pay gap. That's something that even exists not just in Asian countries, but even in the Western part of the world, like England and US, where women who may be working for the same role as a man are paid less, or there is discrimination in terms of education, accessing education. What would you like to say about that specifically?
So basically, you see, the systemic discrimination against women actually arises from the patriarchal culture, which is like a culture where men tend to misuse power and really try to control women in a systemic way, right? So institutions are therefore designed in such a way which are not then, female friendly. They are not friendly towards women, the policies, the laws, right across the board. And that causes a lot of suffering for women in their everyday life, really, because they cannot either escape from injustice if they do not have the right kind of services and laws, and if the people in society, both in terms of like the society as well as the government institutions, they do not support them. So we see that that gives rise to greater injustice. And it is really honestly surprising because even in the 21st century we see that human trafficking of women, the kind of violence against women, it's still so common, and we are still trying to sort of find solutions to these things. So I think that systemic injustice that is there towards women, I think the society and the government, the state, um, everybody's responsible for that, because at the end of the day, women's rights are human rights.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think if you look at the history of Islam, the whole idea of introducing women's rights was to elevate the status of women. But we see the complete opposite in our society. In Muslim Islamic countries like Pakistan, for example, where every other day you hear in the news that someone has been molested, someone has been harassed or abused, or someone has been deprived of their basic divinely granted rights. Why is that the case? Why in our society, when we have we have this concept of equality, justice, compassion, why does it exist then?
So I would say that there are a few reasons for that. I mean, like I said, patriarchy is a huge reason. And it's also because I do not think that people really understand Islam, like the religion, in its entirety. The spirit of Islam with, the surah starting with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the Raham of Allah, this is something that's extremely important. And Allah wants us, when He sent the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam for our guidance, and He's Rahmatul lil Alameen. So clearly, Raham is a very important value, a very important quality that we need to follow, and we need to make sure that all our laws and our society and everything that we do is based on Raham. But surprisingly, maybe because of the lack of proper, reflection or proper knowledge, we do not see a reflection of Raham in the laws or in the ways that people interact with other genders, minority genders, with women, and sometimes even with children. So you see violence against children as well, right?
That's another thing, very common.
That's another
common.
thing.
It's
That's
shocking.
right.
You look at the
shocking,
statistics.
Absolutely.
It's very shocking,
Absolutely.
and it's sad that children are subjected to these things on a daily basis. Like it's in the news, it's in the newspaper every single day that a 3-year-old or a 10-year-old has been molested or subjected to something. And even in educational institutions like madrasas and stuff, why is this happening? Why is there no control?
Absolutely. You see, the reasons, again, like I said, like the patriarchal system, which is sort of permeates through both the society as well as through the state institutions. So when the state, the law is weak, and when people do not stand up for the rights of the oppressed, such as women and children in this case, then you see that there is greater injustice, greater oppression of those gender minorities or women. And that's why it's more prevalent. And combined with sort of poverty, with lack of education, with lack of awareness and employment opportunities, and those other issues, it just becomes much, much more worse. So there are a lot of reasons why the violence is prevalent, but it is not something that is insurmountable. It's not something that one says, oh, we cannot deal with that, because we do see that there are many countries around the world where the gender justice compared to others, they have not reached that status of gender equality, or they have not, it's not like there is zero harassment or zero violence there, but the societies are much better off overall, because they've actually worked progressively and actively on enacting laws and implementing those laws as well. So it is not just that the laws are there only in just on paper. They're actually being implemented, and people are actually getting their rights, for instance, through the court system. And also with societies are actually more empathetic to each other. So I think empathy is, again, like I said, a value that we need to start off ensuring that our laws are based on compassion for the other. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. And we can see that when you talk about gender, it's not just something which is confined to females, but even the transgender community in many countries across Asia, they don't have any rights. They are treated like, second-class citizens. again, they're subjected to gender discrimination, whether it comes to employment or education or health services. Is there no law around that?
So basically, I mean, the international law both completely rejects the idea of subjecting any gender towards any forms of violence. It is extremely important, even in the constitution in Pakistan, that all citizens are equal in front of the law. So all gender minorities, women, everybody is equal in front of the law. And it's very important that the state takes care of each and every person. The state actually has the mandate. And also, obviously, the state is signatory to United Nations conventions as well, which makes it even more important that they ensure that the rights of citizens are taken care of. But you're absolutely right that transgender community really suffers, and gender minorities really do suffer in Pakistan because of the fact, again, that the society, one, from socially, they're not empathetic towards them. And number two, the law and the government, they also do not protect them really. Like the implementation is completely lacking. So we see that they're subjected to violence, to discrimination. They're not given the kind of education or skills, because of which employment is a problem. And even when they do have the education and skills, we see that they are not hired. There's discrimination against them. And of course, that really puts them in a very difficult place, in a very difficult position.
And it also, I think,
definitely
opens doors to exploitation. Like you said, that when they don't have any options to earn their livelihood, then the last option they have is to either beg on the streets or to sell themselves.
Yes,
And again, it's like a vicious cycle that they cannot escape from.
absolutely. You're right, because that is what leads to their abuse, and those sort of elements in the society, the miscreants, actually try to then take advantage of them.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult, because it's a vicious cycle. It's a very difficult place that they are put into. But it is, like I said, it's not insurmountable. It's not something that the government or the society, if they're silent about it, then of course the issues will continue.
Yeah.
But if they do speak up about it, then we can see that there could be certain solutions towards that. So I think strengthening the law would be then very important.
And I think we are seeing that kind of positive change in our society now. Now that a lot of transgender people are being employed, they are going into higher education and earning a livelihood. So you do see that kind of change. It's happening, it's slow, but it's still there.
That's right. That's right. The changes have come in. For instance, in the past few years, the transgender community has been given their CNICs, for instance. So that's very important. And they've been recognized as citizens and as the third gender. So that's sort of, been very important. And of course, whereas the laws are there in, some of the laws are there in theory and on paper, but they're not really there, they're not really being implemented, you see, because the harassment, you see, it's not just maybe just the harassers who are harassing them. It's sometimes also the attitudes of society. For instance, the police, they may not take it seriously. They may not take complaints, or maybe if somebody's requesting an FIR to be launched, the first information report, then that's not taken seriously. And that obviously has a huge impact, because then people lose the trust of the police and the law enforcement, and then they do not pursue it. But then where do you go then? The question is, where do you go? Do you keep arms yourself? Do you start doing that? So that's not really a viable option. So,
like we have this Gulabi gang in India, where there's a group of women dressed in pink, and they go out, and if they find out that someone is being discriminated on the grounds of their gender, if a woman is being mistreated, they just go with their sticks and they sort them out. But we can't have that in our,
Yeah, you see, it's a very difficult position really that they are subjecting, that the government and the sort of the state and the society has really left people in such a situation. And I think the worst thing is that over time this has grown. On one hand, it has actually grown in the sense that like you see that incidents, like we said, of even children. And you see gangs actually doing subjecting women and the trans community as well as children towards very gruesome forms of violence and physical abuse. And when you look at it, really, it's not just, and of course, I mean, I've not even touched upon murder, for instance, because we have had seen that we've had reports of that happening as well, that once the victim has been abused physically, they're actually killed. And even girls as young as 4 years. I mean, there's just been, it's been pretty harrowing. And on one hand, yes, there are more campaigns now, and there are more people in a way opening up about things and talking about them. So that's the positive development, and pressurizing the government and the state to actually do something about these problems. But on the other hand, of course, we don't have the state has not built in capacity. They have not trained personnel of law enforcement to ensure that these things do not happen. So there's a lot of training that's needed. Both medical legal officers, the way they examine women, sometimes that tends to be very intrusive. And that violates the rights of those women as well. And a lot of times they ask them questions which are sort of, more like victim blaming, and which is not right at all. That is absolutely not correct and violates their human rights, really. So, having basic respect and empathy, it's really, really important to train, personnel of the law enforcement, police, medical legal officers, right across the board, to actually take these incidents very seriously if we are actually serious about, ensuring that, we have a harassment-free society, really. So I think that's extremely important.
And also the fact that you need to hire and recruit the right people to do this kind of work. If you hire people who are not trained, who are not qualified, who are not educated, don't have the right skill sets, then it will cause more harm than good. And I think a lot of victims, they choose not to report the cases, they choose not to come forward and expose the perpetrator out of fear of shame or guilt or the way the whole system works. It kind of encourages the perpetrator and
Absolutely.
provides a very unsafe space for the victim itself.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the victim blaming element is, for instance, with regards to women, like what was, she wearing, or, maybe she asked for it. They say those kind of things, and which are actually common right across the world. I mean, more so perhaps in our societies, and but also common throughout the world, that maybe she asked for it, maybe she did something that she was asking for it. But really, that doesn't make any sense at all. A society that victim blames and blames the oppressed, I mean, that society can really not be successful. And I really look at statistics, and countries or nations that actually do more for women's rights and for the rights of the gender minorities, they're actually doing much better economically as well, as opposed to countries that do not. So, like, women constitute 50% of the workforce. And imagine that if women are harassed or abused, or they're not allowed to work, for instance, then imagine that that country is actually losing out. That nation is actually losing out on their human power. And then, of course, that nation will not progress. Of course, they will not really, their welfare will not be up to the optimal level. And I honestly believe that, Allah has created human beings as Ashraful Makhluqat, and we believe that. We have a very strong belief about it. But then, at the same time, you see some people sort of completely not acknowledging this fact and treating women as if they are some kind of either objects, or maybe treating them like children who cannot think for themselves. I mean, so this is really amazing, honestly, because, if you cannot undermine what Allah has created. Allah has actually created men and women to be both very intelligent, both emotionally and intellectually. So it's not that, they are deficient in any kind of way. They do not have any deficiencies, and they need to be therefore given their rights. It's only people who take away the rights of people. Allah has given the law, but we need to make sure that, we are just and we are empathetic towards each other. Otherwise, the problems that we see will really exist. And then, of course, one sees that it impacts people's mental health. It impacts people's physical health. Even women, for instance, if they are, for instance, if they have children or they are going to have a child, it's going to have an impact on the child, the unborn
Definitely.
child, for instance. The mental health impacts the child, the unborn child, and even the children, any other children that they may have, it impacts them as well. So their mental health is also going to be dependent on the mother's mental health, clearly, because she's the one, that they are around. So if you look at it, it's sort of something that is intergenerational, that violence, if we do not control it, the abuse, if we do not control it, then it may actually pass from generations to generations. And then
even
we
injustices,
absolutely
that exist not just in the community or the society, but in a household. When one person is being unjust or unfair, or discriminative to another family member, and children tend to learn these things, and when they grow as adults, they are going to pass that on to the next generation, and ultimately it will
that's
affect
right.
the
That is
entire.
absolutely correct.
Yeah.
That is absolutely correct. They will actually pass it on, and because that is some what is called sort of like a learned behavior. You see, it's a behavior that they are learning when they observe somebody, and particularly in households which have a lot of violence, children will then grow up into adults who are committing that kind of violence, maybe against their own spouse,
Oh,
or
yes.
maybe harassing somebody at their workplace. You
Yeah.
see,
Yeah.
because workplace harassment is very much of a reality. And if workplaces, again, it's not just like we discussed earlier, the law of the country is important, but also workplace laws are very important. So workplaces need to make sure that they have the right kind of laws and policies to address grievances by women and by anybody who is really harassed, and sort of have equitable policies in practice. And that obviously needs, there has to be like a conversation around these issues, obviously, to come up with that. There has to be a recognition that, yes, women are disproportionately discriminated, and therefore we need to make sure that this does not happen. So yes, I mean, it could be that children grow up to be such people, or they may grow up to be even worse. And I think another thing, yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that we also see now is the kind of the harassment that takes place also in the cyberspace and online harassment. People are being sent inappropriate pictures, for instance, inappropriate messages, and whereas some social media platforms have tried to address that, and they do have certain measures that can be taken, but it's still a reality for a lot of people a lot of women who are online. So,
are there any laws around that against cyberbullying or misuse of images and private content in Pakistan? Because I know in UK they have introduced a law now.
So basically, they do have some laws, but again, the question is that the implementation of the laws. We do have currently, the Ministry of Human Rights has launched a reporting helpline, if you like, that one can report about any kind of abuse that one is suffering. But in terms of like practice, it still needs to be seen, because it was just very recently launched in the past couple of months. So we still need to see what is the actual impact. We still need to assess the effectiveness of that. I mean, I think it's a good step, but of course, there needs to be a lot more done rather than just a helpline.
One of the things you mentioned, Noreen, was the fact that there is a gender pay gap, and that's something that's across communities, and not just in developing parts of the world, but even in the West, we see there is a gender pay gap. Then we also have issues concerning sexual harassment in the workplace. Another thing which is quite common, and I was shocked when I read the statistics, that 90% of women who have used some form of public transport in Pakistan, they have been subjected to harassment, inappropriate touching. So when we talk about public transportation, which again is a basic human right for everyone, regardless of their gender, we see that when you step into a bus, for example, and you look at the seating arrangements, there are only like 3 seats available for female passengers, and the rest of the bus is for men only. How come this hasn't been addressed?
Yeah, I think this is something that surely needs to be addressed because, I mean, again, like I said, 50% of the population is women, right?
Women.
And so therefore, at least half the bus needs to be dedicated for women
I think it
seating.
should be buses separately for them.
Yeah, yeah, because I think it's so important because you see, otherwise it really prevents women and girls from, say, acquiring education. Women who are going for universities, right? Women who are going for their jobs. It's really difficult for them to travel because not everybody can afford a private transport. Not
Of
everybody can
course.
go in an Uber. Not everybody can afford a car. So
Mm.
clearly, the vast majority of the women actually do take public transport from right across the social classes, right?
Yeah.
And it's very important that that is affordable, that is cheaper option, and
Mm.
economically that's a very important one. However, you're absolutely right to say that women are subjected to not just sort of the lack of seating, but
Yeah.
also the kind of harassment that they're subjected to.
Yeah.
Honestly, it is really, really shameful that in Muslim societies and Islamic cultures and Islamic countries, we still have that,
Yeah.
kind of catcalling, groping, and touching women inappropriately. I mean, all of that is really extremely, extremely wrong. And again, because of the fact that the law and the society, they don't seem to really care, these incidents do continue even into the 21st century. So whereas you see a lot of women and girls acquiring education compared to, say, 50 years ago, more women and girls going to universities, but
Mm.
things are not very easy for them.
Yeah.
And also for the women who maybe from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and they have even people don't even listen to them. Literally, it's
Mm.
it's almost like they exploit them even more. So in a way, the class dynamics are at play as well. And the less educated a woman, the less empowered a woman, the more likely that she may suffer. So then you see these sort of intersectional, as we call it, discrimination that
Yes.
exists when various forms of, like, say, class, gender, ethnicity, their background also comes into play. And
Mm.
therefore, they may be suffering more as compared to another woman who is from a more educated or a better socioeconomic background. So those things definitely, come into play as well.
What about when it comes to child marriages or early marriages? And that's one major issue in itself. And then on top of that, we still have the system of dowry giving, which is not at all part of our faith. In fact, our faith has been given clear guidelines as to like men are the maintainers and the providers. They are the ones who have to provide everything. Even the concept of meher that was introduced by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam 1400 years ago was to make people understand that when it comes to finances, when it comes to managing household expenses, it's the man's responsibility, not a woman's responsibility. A man cannot demand his wife or his mother or his sister or his daughter for paying the bills or managing the finances. But we see discrimination here, and it's across status. It's not just something that's prevalent among, say, for example, middle class or lower middle class, but even in upper class we see that this dowry system exists, early marriages and forced marriages, and it's often the female gender who is suffering the most as a result.
Absolutely, that is absolutely correct. I mean, even though in Pakistan they've tried to bring in laws to put in a minimal age for marriage, however, that law, again, the implementation is completely lacking. And not just sort of marriages of girls, underage girls, but we also see that there's also forced conversion of girls from, say, the minority Hindu and Christian communities, often as young as 12 or 13 or 14-year-old girls. I mean, that time, of course, they do not understand, and often they're also abducted. So there's
Right.
abduction, and then there is forced conversion of such girls, and then forced marriages. So that is a really difficult reality, and a lot of these girls, they come from sort of lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and they come in from rural areas as well. And so therefore, their families are not empowered really, because they have no state support. And so it's very, very difficult to, counter this. It's very difficult for the family, really. So again, obviously, it requires a change in law and sort of greater enforcement. But we see that this is very common. And of course, girls, as young as maybe 12, 13, I mean, they're also married off without, obviously, I mean, that's absolutely illegal. But that does happen. And it sort of goes against both international law, it goes against the national law as well. But I mean, people tend to get away with it again because, there's also that culture of bribe, giving bribe to the police and law enforcement that exists in countries like Pakistan. So people then tend to get away with it, really. And then they, of course, misuse religion and try to justify their actions, which they're wrong actions, of course. And so I think it's really sad that these things exist. And what you said about dowry, I mean, it is really, I think, amazing that even in today's day and age, when we see so many more women coming to the workforce and, they're so much more empowered, we still see that there are those archaic ideas about women bringing in dowries. And if the women do not bring in enough dowry, then they're actually shamed. And so that obviously has an impact on their psychological health as well, their mental health, right? And they're made to feel small by the guy or his family. And so we see that in society, women are therefore subject to this sort of harassment and discrimination. Whereas a man who, like you said, that it is wajib for a man to give the meher, the dowry, to the woman instead. And they're never questioned about how little of a meher they may have given or something of the sort. It's never the girl's family who says to the guy that, oh, you gave us such little meher, I mean, that never happens.
If the meher is given, that's another thing.
It is,
I mean, writing it on a piece of paper is one thing, but when it actually comes to giving or asking for the meher, that's another story,
absolutely. Right? So that's another story. You're absolutely right. If the meher is given, and of course, when the meher is not given, and say that it leads to them going for a divorce, then it of course causes multiple problems, because then there's a court case, and then of course again, like I said, the rules and the laws are actually stacked against women. So then the women end up giving up a lot. And a lot of times in marriages, women may be told, like, for instance, the husband may ask the wife to not work. And because of that, she may miss out on having her career and having her own income, which again makes her dependent on either her parents, maybe who might have some money, or the state. If the state is not there, if the state does not provide, like for instance in Pakistan, then of course she is really dependent either on the man. And this is actually one of the reasons why a lot of women then may choose to stay in abusive relationships, because they do not see a way out, because if they do not get support from either the state or their families, where do they go? So they may actually choose to stay in such relationships. And this is what may lead to suicide tendencies. I mean, depression, suicide, all of that in women. So I think therefore we really need to look into it, the kind of societies that we want to create, the kind of community that we want to create. Do we want our communities to be empowered, or do we want them to have empathy, and do we want to have relationships based on empathy and compassion? Or are we sort of just going to be led by a system that violates the right of at least 50% of the population and causes a great deal of harm towards them? So are we sort of going to go with that? And I think that's a very important question, because like we were talking about Islam and the rights that Islam has given, but we see that all these rights are abused and they are not given to the women. So in a way, of course, that's what a lot of others might see, and they think, oh, this is Islam, what you're practicing is Islam. So what people are practicing in society is that injustice. They think, oh, that is Islam then. So in a way, it really tarnishes the image of Islam. if we do not address it, if we do not address this kind of gender injustice, so it would really tarnish. Yes, it would really tarnish the image of Islam, because that is what somebody else would see who has not read Islam, who does not know about the essence of Islam, that it's based on, or does not have the understanding. So they will actually assume that oppression, oppressing women, oppressing gender minorities, oppressing transgenders, this is Islam, that they will understand that. It's only when, a person studies and, understands that, no, this is not Islam at all. Islam is against any form of injustice or discrimination. Islam says that regardless of who it is, regardless of the religion, pay them equally. They should all be paid equally. The kind of wages that a person gets, they should be given immediately, and they should be given equally. So there should not be any kind of discrimination when it comes to that. But then again, this is why we really need to look at things from a more compassionate perspective, and also ensure that we treat women as human beings, and not as.
If you are claiming that you are an Islamic state, Islamic country, then your laws, your regulations, policies, procedures should accommodate the teachings of Islam. Now, if Islam has given all these rights to women, then who are you to deprive them of that? A simple example is that of when a marriage takes place, when somebody gets married, right? You have this marriage certificate, or the Aqd-name or the Nikah-nama, where certain conditions or certain sections have been crossed out prior to signing the contract. Why? Because they just assume, oh, you know what, the woman doesn't need to put conditions down, or she's not entitled to these rights and responsibilities, because I get to choose, because I'm a man, I'm more influential, or I am more powerful. Although Islam says nobody is superior than anybody. Only the person who has the high level of piety or taqwa is the one who's superior, nobody else. But we see that something as major as getting married is concerned, women don't even know what their rights are, and they just sign a sheet of paper without reading, without understanding. I mean, how many weddings have you attended, Noreen, where the Maulana or the Islamic scholar or the representative of the bride or the groom actually sits down with the couple and says, okay, these are your rights, these are your responsibilities, and you guys can put any conditions as you like, and then you sign the contract. It is a contract, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a contract, and you're absolutely right that a lot of women do not read that contract. I mean, a lot of women just end up just signing it. And I'm just not talking about women who cannot read or write. Yes, that is also obviously a huge chunk of the population who cannot genuinely read and write. And they're not even told that these are your rights, or these are the husband's rights, these are the wife's rights. They're not told that either. And on top of that, you have the men who are actually sort of educated, and they also don't read it, and they also do not they also sign it without reading it, and that's a substantial chunk of the society. And they just maybe trust their I don't know, maybe a relative or somebody that they will take care of that. But when it comes to sort of later on, it really has a huge impact, because those questions are there that, in all honesty, one has to address them, understand them, and say, yes, I agree with these terms and conditions. And if I do not ask for X thing, I will not get X thing. If I do not ask for Y thing, I will not get Y. So I need to be very, very clear that these are my rights, and I need to know what I'm giving up, because end of the day, it is we are human beings. That is why Allah has made divorce halal
permissible
in our religion. Yes, permissible. It is halal, it is permissible. Why? Because of the fact that we are human beings, we can make mistakes, right? And we can, there may be a problem in relationships, and if there is, that Allah does not want us to be with the same person, that Allah has given us that way out after we actually investigate and we try to reconcile. If that doesn't work, then the way out is there. But not informing the woman at the time of her marriage, not letting her read the Nikah-nama, or not explaining things to her if she's not educated enough to read it, or for even women themselves not reading it, really is putting your entire life into somebody else's hands who's also a mortal. At the end of the day, it's not like, the other person is infallible. Obviously men and women are not infallible, they're completely fallible. And that is why it is there. So I think it's very, very important that all women need to understand it. It is not about the ego, it is about basic rights which the religion has given. And it's just to ensure that everybody understands the other person and we are all on the same page, really. So I think it's very important that people do read their nikahnamas and they do understand what they're in for. And I'm actually glad that in certain communities, I have seen this particularly in the West, that there are actually trainings and workshops given to young adults who may be sort of looking at getting married. And I think these things are explained to them in those workshops. But of course, that may be only a certain section of the society that's actually attending them. But the society at large, when you look at our communities, the Muslim communities, it's really not there, and but we need a lot more awareness to ensure that, women's rights are not violated.
I think they should almost make it obligatory for any person who is considering to get married to go for a pre-marriage course, not just Islamically, but also in the legal perspective, so they know what their rights and responsibilities and duties are, what they're entitled to, what they're not entitled to. Because we see this, that there is a certain group of people who think they are privileged and they're entitled to lots of things that they're not entitled to, that they're not privileged to have, but they assume they do, and that's where injustices and oppression takes place, and that destroys lives, that destroys
Absolutely.
families,
And I think you
communities.
see, the reason again that's there is because of the fact that it is being acted out by the society. The society is actually practicing that injustice. So any young adult or any young person who grows up, I work with a lot of young people as well. So when they grow up, they think this is what the religion is. And they are sometimes told by, again, their misinformed, maybe elders, maybe parents who are misinformed, who have not read about religion, who have not understood religion, that yes, this is the way you keep a woman. So instead of telling them that, you have to be compassionate, you have to be merciful, you have to be empathetic, they, actually end up really teaching them things which are completely contrary to the teachings of Islam. And that's why you see in South Asian culture, regardless of the religion, whether a person is a Muslim or a Christian or a Hindu, these things are common.
Yes, across cultures in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan.
Yes, they're completely common, and that's why we can relate so much to each other's problems, because of the fact that it's not something that is sort of restricted to people of one religion. But we know that clearly Islam is totally against it. If somebody just reads basic books on Islam, and reads maybe if they do taqleed and they read what the Maraja taqleed have said, then they will understand that, what, this is not right. This is actually sinful. So I think it's very important for us to say that it can be criminal, or it can also be sinful from an ethical and moral perspective. And I think if one recognizes and understands that, then, one would change, one would have that incentive to change. And that's why I think it's so important. Like Islam says that Iqra, read, you must read. And reading and studying does not stop just after university or college.
Of course.
One has to learn throughout their lives. But we see that, till their last breath. But we see that a lot of people, they do not read about religion. They do not maybe attend lectures. They do not, try to understand the essence of religion. And maybe they look at it from a very surface level, and they look at it from a more ritualistic perspective. And Islam is not really like that. Islam is not, just about rituals, just about praying, fasting. That is not the essence. The essence is to take human beings to the higher levels, that which makes them ashraful makhluqat. That is the sort of they have so much capacity within themselves, of reaching that higher order, higher level of thinking, higher level of doing. And when they resort to such things which are actually brought upon as a result of their ego, right? So all these things result in power imbalance. This results in from the ego, because the ego wants to control the other person. And so when they want to control the other person, that also obviously means that, they are sort of going down in terms of their they're not really going towards their optimal side. They're going in the negative direction. And that of course has a huge impact
This is
on
why
their.
I think Imam Ali alayhi salam has said that when you look at a person, don't judge them by just looking at the number of fasts they keep or the number of rakats that they pray, but look at how they treat people. Hukukul ibad is such an important thing. I mean, when it comes to rights of Allah, I mean, there is hope that Allah will forgive you. But when it comes to rights of people, I mean, those who have read the book, The Divine Rights by Imam Zainul Abidin, that every single part of your body has rights over you, and how you treat people, how you communicate with them, the type of language you use, it all
Absolutely.
shapes your character. Your relationship
Absolutely.
with Allah is based on that. So like you said, listening to lectures, yes, it's important, but just listening on its own is not enough. You have to implement those teachings. You have
Implement
to
them.
do a lot of contemplation and reflection to understand yourself first before you can understand others. And I see, unfortunately, this is not the case.
Yes, because you see, people, if they don't learn, then they're not going to progress. And that is, you look at that in every profession. If you're a doctor, you need to keep on taking different courses. If I'm a teacher, then I need to take on different courses to make sure that I am teaching, with the latest technology, with the latest equipment, that I understand the concepts. So similarly, as a human being, Allah, if you believe in Allah and you believe in Islam, then of course He's given you all the knowledge, but you just need to actually study it. And not think that, oh, I've studied whatever I had to maybe in the madrasa and that was enough for me.
No.
It is not enough. One has to delve deeper, reflect. Like Allah says in the Quran, mutafakkirun, the ones who actually think. But that is what I feel, that in our societies and cultures, we do not have that culture of fikr. We do not have the culture of reflection. And then therefore we see that we are lacking in so many spheres. And we should have actually, because of the fact that we have this Islamic knowledge, because of the fact that Allah wants us to do raham, to make sure that everything is coming from that place, we should have been actually much ahead, maybe of the world, actually. If you look at it, we actually implemented everything in the spirit that Allah has told us to. But we are actually lagging behind because we have chosen to actually follow our egos in these respects. And that's why we sort of, we do not want to accept it. I mean, a lot of people, they do not want to accept it, and they actually try to justify it by misinterpreting religion. So then, of course, it means that, for instance, the infant mortality rate in Muslim countries, in Pakistan, for instance, the maternal mortality rate, for instance, with women dying after childbirth and during childbirth, when they're pregnant, is much higher as compared to maybe the developed countries, the developed economies. Clearly, it is not just happening in a vacuum. It is happening because of the fact that the support system is not around those women. Whether the healthcare support, that's not around women. I've noticed, and I was very surprised, that people from very sort of, if you like, even from the better socioeconomic backgrounds and educated backgrounds, I was so surprised that they were not looking after the women who were sick. I was really, really surprised. I mean, I could not believe it.
But expectant mothers, or mothers who have just given birth.
That's right. And then there are also men who also abuse their wives even when they are pregnant. So you see,
that's
all
common
of this
in West as well. Trust me, I get to hear cases every day from sisters who are pregnant, who are expectant mothers, and they are beaten black and blue by their husbands. And this is why in certain, I mean, there's in East London, hospitals in East London, they have these posters and stickers where they tell women to seek help, if they are subject to physical abuse.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. And I think that also, you see, the thing is that for women, with regards to this kind of violence, I think there's also that, again, the fact that in our culture, a lot of women are told that, once you get married, you do not, come back, and, that kind of thing. The parents, maybe some of them do not want the women to break that marriage. And because of that, they let their daughter suffer within that marriage. And she is then reluctant to go back. and therefore she's enduring all of this. And of course, in Pakistan, in a country like Pakistan, such women can also be killed, right,
Oh,
by their
yes.
husbands.
Yes.
And of course, then they're subjected to various kinds of abuse. For instance, acid attacks are very
Yes.
common against women in Pakistan.
Yes.
And
Now
this
even
is
men,
something.
I've heard, I've recently heard that even men, young men, they are being, affected by acid attacks, not
Yeah,
just.
it could be. It could be because you see, again, acid attacks and, for instance, like honor killings.
Yes.
These are some of those extreme forms of violence which are more obviously common towards women. I mean, women are sort of subjected to it a lot more than men are, but that doesn't mean that men are not subjected to it at all. The honor killing usually results in maybe tribes or communities actually
Even
killing.
religion, when we see, for example, Shia genocide or Shia missing persons, isn't that targeted at a certain ethnicity and gender? Like most men who belong to, say, for example, the Shia faith of Islam, they suddenly go missing or they are targeted and they're killed because of their
Yeah, I mean,
affiliation.
yes, of course, of course. I mean, people who, I mean, Shia genocide is obviously a reality in Pakistan,
Hmm.
absolutely. And I think that, I've also campaigned against that because, like the women who belong to these communities, they
Yes.
are subjected disproportionately because they do not know whether that male member of their family, whether it's like their brother or it's their husband or their son, they don't know if he is alive or not. I
Yeah.
mean, they don't know. Either maybe that person has been killed. They're
Mm.
sometimes abducted, sometimes they're killed. And so the women are then suffering a lot of trauma. There are also children who were born in the absence of the father. And the father, they still do not know if the father is alive, or if he's alive, then where is he? So this is also something that I have worked on in Pakistan, and sort of to raise the voice of such women.
Mm.
And honestly, it's very difficult for them. So women are again on the sort of they are on the suffering. They're suffering as a result of men being abducted as well. So I think
Yes.
it's something that's very much there. It's something which is very it causes a lot of disturbance in
Mm.
the sort of the family life, of course, and the children are hugely impacted as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we do
Do
need an
you
active role of the state for
do
that.
you think, Noreen, the way our society works, this is a whole system. I mean, the law enforcement agencies are, say, for example, corrupted. They are not strong enough. The right people are not recruited to do the job. Then we also have a lot of prejudices and misconceptions and stereotypes and taboos within the communities where they don't address these issues. They're kind of brushed under the carpet, and this cycle of people suffering in silence all their lives until they die, this continues. Do you think women themselves are a major part of this? For example, if an injustice happens within the community, if a woman is being, for example, abused or harassed or has been subjected to sexual molestation, and there's another woman who's aware of this, but she pressurizes that victim to stay quiet, to not speak about it, to not share it with this information with
Mm.
anyone, not to expose the perpetrator because the perpetrator is male, more powerful, superior, or an influential person or somebody with authority.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You see, the thing is that, again, this really comes to the point of how the society perceives um, a person who's being oppressed. Is the
Hmm.
society standing up for that woman? If the society or the people around that, other women who are around, and if they feel and they believe that it is wrong that a woman is being subjected to torture, then
Hmm.
they would surely do something about it. If they feel that this is something unjust, then they would definitely do something about it. They will try to maybe help that woman to escape from where she is. Maybe they'll try to maybe find a shelter for that woman, a place of refuge where she can be safe. But if those women maybe side with the perpetrator, if they side with the person who's being aggressive, who's actually inflicting this kind of torture,
Yeah.
then of course they are part of the problem. Because I mean, obviously men and women both can be wrong. I mean, it's not as if, women, cannot be wrong. They can be.
Yeah, of
And
course.
they can be part and party to the patriarchal system. And sometimes some women are part and party to the patriarchal system. And we see that how a lot of times daughter-in-laws, in certain areas in Pakistan, for instance, how acid attacks take place. Sometimes it's also the women who are involved in that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, the disproportionate victims are women, and the disproportionately it's men, men who are doing this to women, right? But then, yes, there is a minority of women who's also maybe got the idea wrong regarding justice and injustice, and they do not understand what is abuse and what is injustice, or maybe they just let it be, I mean, or it could be that maybe they feel that they do not, like, whatever they will do will have no impact. Some women may even think that, because they feel that if they get involved, the person may come after them. So maybe out of fear, they will not say something. So
Yeah.
I personally know of somebody who actually said that she knew another woman who was killed. But she said that, she didn't feel in her neighborhood somebody was killed, and she didn't feel that she could actually talk about it to even other neighbors or to the police, because then, there'll be this cycle that she'll get involved into. And there
Yeah.
is, I mean, that person might come after their family. So people sometimes also do not report out of fear, because they do not feel they're supported and their voices are not going to be supported. So as if they will be putting themselves at risk for speaking up for somebody. And it is true. Sometimes, yes, you have to really face those sort of, consequences. So
Yeah.
it's a difficult one, because, like, if there are lesser number of people who are
Mm.
standing up for justice and truth and for the rights of women and for the rights of gender minorities, then of course they may be subject also to harassment and kinds of behaviors which sort of, which
Because
would just make their life difficult.
there is no safe space, there's no security for witnesses either. So if somebody wants to support the victim and they want to raise their voice against the perpetrator, there is no security for them. The way things
Absolutely.
work, the way the system works, they are at risk. And unlike
Yes.
here in the West, where you can take injunction against the perpetrator, and the perpetrator will be kind of, if they breach peace, then they will be arrested and then prosecuted. But in so many countries, we don't have that kind of system where maybe the
Absolutely.
perpetrator will get away with it. They can bribe the law enforcement
Yes.
agencies, or
Yes.
maybe they belong to like really powerful tribal lords
Yes.
or families, or
Yeah.
maybe they belong to some influential, backgrounds where they know they have the privilege to get away with even murder.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And unfortunately, we also have in Pakistan the defamation laws, which also make it very difficult for people to call out somebody who may be a perpetrator, the aggressor.
Mm,
So I think it's become really, really difficult for women then to speak up and to say that X person has harassed them or abused them in a certain way.
mm,
And, like, I think that just makes their own lives so difficult, because there is less and less support, and then there's less and less room for to come up with the truth, because the society at large is not ready to accept that. The society at large does not want to hear that, and they still sort of stick with the victim blaming mentality.
mm,
That maybe they think that somebody is just trying to maybe put up a show, or they're just trying to do it for fame. I mean,
mm.
really, that's really not, not the
Whereas
case.
character assassination is another thing that exists, you know, and we always try to target that person who's vulnerable, or weak, or doesn't have a very good, strong support system. So it's easier to tarnish their character.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? The other thing is, like, in Pakistan, for instance, like, some of the proponents for very serious crimes against women. So some proponents have said that, that the death penalty needs to be brought in, so that it reduces the number of people, they argue, who are actually committing these crimes against women. But we know from statistics and studies that the death penalty does not really help,
Mm,
because there's, for instance, death penalty for murder in Pakistan, but people still commit murder. and you
Yeah,
hear about
yeah,
it every other day. So it is not really a deterrent.
yeah.
What is more important is that, again, like I said, that law enforcement and the society at large and the training of people, sensitization, that is more important to really take women's sort of grievances seriously, to take their whatever that they're saying seriously, because it is not easy for a woman to come up and say something
Of
against a
course.
man. And in Pakistan, I've also seen that recently there have even been cases of very privileged women
Mm.
who've come out and spoken against their harassers, and even their cases are not being taken seriously. So it's very, very difficult. I think it just puts, imagine if the privileged ones who come from better socioeconomic backgrounds, who are more
Yes.
empowered, if they are really struggling to fight their case, then imagine that woman who does not have the resources to sort of
Mm.
go to the courts and does not have that knowledge. So it
It's a
puts that
never-ending
woman,
fight. It's a never-ending
that's
fight.
right. That's right. It just puts that woman in a much worse off position. And from a sort of psychological perspective, it's just so much more difficult. And you see, the
Mm.
other thing is that even like if there was sort of, like death penalty for extreme violent crimes against women, the problem is that the vast majority, like you said, of people who come in from the privileged backgrounds, like,
Yeah.
rich tribal backgrounds, because Pakistan is a
Mm.
tribal society, it is a feudal society.
Mm.
So people who come, landlords, and they
Yeah.
actually can get themselves bailed out through the
Easily.
courts, and
Yeah.
very easily. And
Mm.
that is why they are never impacted. They have almost, impunity. They are almost forgiven for committing very violent crimes because of the fact that they are rich and that they can get away with it, because the
So,
law is not really geared towards the rich, it's just towards the poor, really, if
yeah.
you look at it,
So,
you
Noreen,
know.
because we only have a few minutes left, I just want to ask you, like, to, summarize everything that we have discussed so far. We know all these challenges exist, regardless of socioeconomic status, religion, or ethnicity. We know this exists, these problems related to gender inequality, gender discrimination. How can we end these challenges? How can we stop the cycle? As
um
normal civilians, what can we do? We can't make
so I
changes at the governmental level, but within our households, within our families, our network.
Absolutely. It starts from the micro and then it goes on to the macro. It starts from the self. If everybody thinks that I will actively make sure that my words, my actions, my thoughts are not unjust, they're not biased, I'm not discriminating some towards anybody, that is where the start is. And then they show that in terms of like their interaction with their family, that they are sort of not abusive, they are kind, they're gentle, they are empathetic, they're compassionate. And then of course it goes on towards their colleagues, obviously, and you wider society, whether they're traveling through public transport and all of that. And then of course they should also actively try to campaign against the gender injustice, because this will be just a gain for them. This is a gain for their own women, for their maybe their future daughters. This is a gain for their future generation, so they should not be afraid to not speak up for the truth. And I think as Muslims it is so important that we always speak against injustice, and we should not be scared of that. We should not be scared of social norms, we should not be scared of the state or society or anybody. And that is how, if every person works on it, they will be able to change the system. And we do see that happening. It's happening very slowly, but it is actually happening. And I'm really
And
glad
I
that
think, yeah,
some laws have been changed recently. So at least there's progress. I mean, yes, we are stuck in Pakistan on implementation, but at least there is progress. And we just need to make sure that we keep progressing. And it's kind of at a snail's pace, but at least it keeps on happening. And the more voices, the more people who speak up for somebody who they think is like being oppressed, maybe even an animal, one needs to speak up even for an animal, leave alone for another human being. So I
thank
think
you.
it
Thank
is
you
just
so much,
so
Noreen,
important to do that. Thank you so
for
much,
this
Haley.
insightful conversation, and I enjoyed every minute of it, and I'm sure our audience enjoyed it as much as I did. I would like to conclude the show with this saying of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, this great man who 1400 years ago said that even if you don't believe in religion, be free from tyranny, be free from oppression. Look after your mental health, look after the mental health of people around you. Inshallah, we'll see you next Saturday with another guest and another topic. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.